Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining this panel on the security architecture we want for Europe, to question, rethink, and reshape the way we have built in the international system, the concept we have of security, the peace agenda, and all this narrative around. As we have been discussing throughout the day in all the panels, we are facing great challenges, socioeconomic crisis, pandemics, and existential threats such as climate change. So in front of all these challenges that we are facing, concepts like common security can bring us some light. So 40 years after the commission, the Palme Commission, the Common Security Report entitled For Our Shared Future that has been developed by the Palme Center together with the International Peace Bureau and the International Trade Union Confederation kind of revisits this concept and puts it into our present, these current challenges. So I'm very happy that we can have all these brilliant speakers to reflect on this complex topic. I'm gonna quickly introduce them. We're gonna start with Joseph Gerson, Vice President of the International Peace Bureau and member of the No to NATO, No to War Steering Committee. He's president of the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security too, an expert on great power confrontation, and he's been a peace activist since a lot of years. Too many, maybe. He said from the Vietnam War. Reiner Braun, he's executive director also of the International Peace Bureau. He's been actively involved in the peace movement, and he told me to stop here. He has like many other things he's been involved in, but he can explain it himself. And finally, we have Katrina Anastasio. She's the facilitator of the chapters Migration and Global Strategy in Transform Europe. She's active in various grassroots groups in Austria and Europe. And her focus is militant organizational practices and communication, right? So we are gonna speak 15 minutes each, starting with Joseph. 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will start with the debate and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. First, just to say our plane landed sometime after 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm in my third week of travel beginning in Mongolia. So we'll take this as it comes. Just to say that during the Vietnam War, I was the lead peace organizer in Arizona, one of the most isolated and conservative states in the United States. That was a time before the internet. There was an extreme right-wing monopoly press. It was isolated. It was hard. And in that circumstance, some of us took great inspiration from Olof Palme, then the Prime Minister of Sweden, who was an outstanding opponent of the war and was calling for the United States to withdraw. That's when Palme first got my attention. Then, at the height of the Cold War, when both the United States and the Soviet Union were moving to deploy new nuclear weapons and missiles in Europe, which were bringing us within a hair's breadth of human extinction from nuclear war, Palme had the inspiration to bring together very senior leaders from the Soviet Union, from across Europe, and from the United States and Canada, how to build back from this existential threat. And it's interesting. I mean, among other things, I read the memoir of Alexei Gromyko, who was, not Gromyko, Arbatov, who was a very, very senior advisor to Gorbachev. And he explains in his memoir how the discussions with these figures helped him to understand that security could not be built through the arms race. And of course, this happened to the other participants in the commission. And so they issued a report which concluded that no nation can achieve security against its rival, because when one country moves to increase its weapons, ostensibly for defensive purposes, the other side sees that as a growing threat, and then it builds new weapons, and you have a spiraling race upward. The question was, how do you build a spiraling race downward? And so the idea was you could only achieve security in association with your rival. You know, not you know, cream puff kind of diplomacy, hard diplomacy, where the leaders would lay out what the other side was doing that was most threatening to them, and both sides would do that, and then to negotiate how you can address the fears of the other side without decreasing your own security. That discussion, fueled in part by the mass movements in Europe, in the United States, by Gorbachev's brilliant statesmanship, led to ultimately the negotiation of the INF Treaty in 1987. It was actually with that treaty that the Cold War ended. It ended before the collapse of the Berlin Wall. It ended before the fall of the Soviet Union. So what does that have to do with today? I want to begin maybe by reading an opening paragraph of a talk that I gave in Mongolia. Vladimir Putin's devastating and illegal invasion of Ukraine, launched in large measure to compensate for strategic vulnerabilities caused by NATO's expansion, has triggered the most tumultuous and potentially dangerous transformation of the geopolitical disorder since the end of World War II and the imposition of the Cold War. Internationally, there is near complete absence of trust and cooperation between the world's most powerful nations, even as we face the existential threats. And we need to understand, existential threats, that's not just rhetoric, right? I mean, humanity is facing the existential threats of possible nuclear war, which we've been highlighted now with the Ukraine war, and also a climate crisis. We are cursed with the near complete absence of arms control agreements, with the exception of the New START agreement, which will soon expire, and hopes that global warming can be limited to 1.5 degrees centigrade have essentially evaporated. We need to understand that all of the nuclear weapon states are, at this point, moving, they call it modernizing. They're upgrading all of their nuclear arsenals. And what we had with Putin's threat to use nuclear weapons was actually simply a replay of what the United States has done during international crises, at least 30 times during international crises and wars. So let me then move to why we talk in terms of common security. Common security is not my ideal, right? I mean, it is based on the power relations of countries. I mean, you can have common security within your society, right? Economic common security, so all boats rise together. You can have common security in relationship to the environment. But at the level of military and even economic competition, it's not my goal. I'd rather have more complete justice. But the reality is that we are at the brink of catastrophe. And, you know, there's the old saying that when elephants fight, it's the grass or the ants that get clobbered, right? So in many ways, we're the ants and we're the grass. And our function is to try to, one of our functions is to try to organize, push, direct, coordinate the elephants so they don't destroy us. One of my board members basically says, in terms of common security, it involves dealing with some very nasty people, sociopathic millionaire arms dealers and dictators. But that's the world we live in. And most of them are not about to be overthrown anytime soon. So how do we prevent those existential threats? Looking here in terms of time, I want to commend to everyone the Common Security for Shared Future report. You can get it on IPB's webpage, you can get it on the Palma Center's, you can get it on my organizations. It gives us a vision of what's possible and what's needed. I won't run through all of the details of it, but it looks to build, if you will, common security. And it needs pressure from below, right? In the United States, which at this point is a horror. I mean, only to say in the discussions here today, I haven't heard very much about what the future of the U.S. Role with NATO will be, given the election catastrophes we face in 2022, 2024. What the United States will be, where the government will want to go, with the exception of whoever wins will want to be engaged in confrontation with China, right? So we have that. I guess what I want to focus on is both how we can move in terms of common security in relationship to the Ukraine war, and how we, as the title of this panel is focused on European security architecture. First of all, I think it's a near consensus in the U.S. peace movement that what we have to be struggling for is a ceasefire in Ukraine, demanding negotiations, the establishment of a neutral and a neutral Ukraine with all foreign troops out, and to recognize that we're likely to be dealing with something like a dirty deal, right? The Russians are not about to be leaving Donetsk and Luhansk. But the question is, can that be put on the shelf as a diplomatic process, rather than fighting this war to the last Ukrainian, or facing the possibility that this could still escalate, right? I mean, we've gotten used to this war's ongoing, but if you look at Russian nuclear doctrine, it's that they can use their nuclear weapons if the security of the Russian state is at risk, right? So if the war does go on as Biden and Austin and others want, indefinitely, and to weaken Russia, which in turn might threaten Putin's rule, their doctrine allows for the use of tactical nuclear weapons, and that in turn could lead to, or would lead to exchanges and nuclear Armageddon. The other possibility, which I think is unlikely, is we have Zelensky, NATO, and the U.S. calling for victory in this war. Well, victory in this war means defeat for Russia. Defeat for Russia means jeopardy for Putin, which in turn, again, could lead to escalation. Not necessarily nuclear, but it could. So we really need to be pressing from below for ceasefire, negotiated settlements. Then to look at maybe 3 different layers of diplomacy that we should be advocating. And I know, it's a little bit complex for street demands and for rally cries, but maybe 3 different levels, right? So on the one hand, we need to be encouraging Ukrainian-Russian negotiations. Not easy, would likely need to be facilitated by other parties. Maybe the Pope, maybe Xi Jinping, maybe Macron and Scholz. Not that they're anybody's favorite people, but in the world of realpolitik, we need to find a way to do that. Reiner, I'm just stealing from his language here, suggested that if Ukraine wants to be part of the European Union, maybe they have to sacrifice Donetsk and Luhansk. It's going to be nasty, but we don't want to be facing Armageddon or having this war fought to the last Ukrainian. I want to back up for just a second and to say that beyond the INF Treaty, the common security model had huge impacts here on Europe, right? I mean, you had the Paris Charter of, 1990? You had the NATO-Russia founding agreement. and you had the 1999 OSCE statement, all of which said that no nation can move to secure its security at the expense of others. I listened to an interview with Lavrov done on BBC yesterday, and there he is saying, the West violated those common, he used the word common security, violated those common security commitments, which he uses as the rationale for the war. So simply to say that the next level of negotiations needs to be essentially U.S. NATO on the one side and Russia on the other. Hard negotiations, but to look at how we recreate some form of a Atlantic Eurasian common security foundation. The possibility has been calls for a Helsinki process meeting in 2025, with Finland joining NATO at this point. People are now talking in terms of a Dublin or a Vienna or a Switzerland process. But we need to hold that vision there. We need to be driving our countries to be talking about building if you will, recreating a common European home. Finally, there's the need for U.S.-Russian negotiations. Thank you. I've got this one here. And here we're in a situation where there's actually no trust, absolutely no strategic stability, and so we have to be pressing from below in the United States and here as well for renewing those arms control agreements. Arms control agreement is not all I want, right? I mean, I want abolition of nuclear weapons, but that at least begins to build some strategic stability. Maybe we can begin to halt the nuclear arms race that's here. The Common Security Report runs through a whole list of nuclear disarmament as well as climate and other specific steps that can be taken. The last thing I want to say is that this is not the world of Genghis Khan. It's not the world of Bismarck. It's not the world of the First World War. This is truly a global world in which we're very much interdependent. And while it may seem to many people in Europe that China is far away, the reality is that even as the United States and NATO are for the moment focused on Russia, the big game, the big struggle is between the United States and China. It's described as a Thucydides trap, the traditional tensions between rising and declining powers. That's what caused World War I, among others. So Europe is in a unique situation where, again, as we build vision, we can be thinking in terms of Europe as a mediator. I mean, the levels of conflict, the levels of arms race, the levels of tension between the United States and China are huge. Reiner this morning was talking about Tibet. Tibet has become the hinge, the absolute hinge of the global geopolitical struggle for power. Right, I mean, with the U.S. and Biden's commitments to defend Taiwan, which China understands as part of China, were, one way or another, war to come to Taiwan, were the United States not able to defend Taiwan, which it can't except by nuclear threat, which means the end of all of us, were the United States then to lose Taiwan, what does that mean for its alliances in Europe? What does that mean for its alliances in Asia Pacific and elsewhere? The whole structure of U.S. power, the whole structure of U.S. power hinges ultimately on Taiwan and the need for us to work for common security solutions. It says I've got 2 minutes. I don't know if I need all those 2 minutes. I think what's important for us is, as peace movements, we have multiple responsibilities, right? We need to be thinking in terms of, in addition to common security between nations, if we're going to build popular support, right, if we're going to build the movements we need to be thinking in terms of common security around economic development, common security around the climate, and build the integrated movements that can move us forward, understanding the commonality of it all. And I guess the last thing to say, and this may sound a little bit funny, but you know, I think many of us here, probably all of us, think that preservation of human life, that prevention of war, ending war, preventing the disastrous climate threats that we face are our most important values, and our families work into that, right? And so just to conclude, if we say that this is what's most important to us, then that means that's how we have to live our lives. And that means making changes, it means making sacrifices. And I'll close with that, with the sense that, you know, we all need to work together. I feel really privileged to be here, and I know that international solidarity and cooperation is essential to, if you will, preserving human life. Thank you.
Thank you. Should I just go ahead? Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, by the way. I hope you can hear me well. The distance to the mic is okay? Good. I was asked today to speak as well as the others a little bit about European security architecture. I will not tell you, I will let NATO to the expert after me, but I do want to start by addressing what security means for the current leadership of the European Union and what it should mean for us. We live in capitalism, right? A world where every relationship is more or less defined by constant concurrence, constant antagonisms, and we've been told for many, many years, and this is what Joseph just described very boldly, that the more guns we have, the more secure we are. So I want you now to go with me to Joseph's country, where you have a kid and it goes to school, and holding a gun is pretty much a constitutional right that a lot of people are not willing to give up, and realize how many children die in these classrooms every year. Here in Europe we don't have that, but we have had amok, you know, crazy people just killing other people that they didn't find somehow fitting in their idea of what Europe means. I remind you all that most of the violent crimes of the last year actually came from far-right, racist, misogynist people that got access to guns and started shooting around, starting from Utoya, where over 100 young people got killed when they were in a camp, going over to different too much murders in Germany, but also in other countries. And I want you to think also at our borders. I don't know how many of you saw the news of yesterday. I highly encourage you to Google it, although they're very, very bad pictures to see. But this is how Europe manages its borders. We shoot people right now. We drown them and we shoot them. So security is understood as by the Union right now as military shielding out of what is actually social problems and inequality problems. They give military solutions to problems that are actually embedded in our very societies. And we all know that this kind of problems need political solutions. And there is no gun that will help us stop climate change. There is no gun that will help us stop the diversity collapse. There is no gun that will help us be less racist and less misogynist and nicer to each other. And these are the real problems of our societies. Unfortunately now, selling guns is big business. And there are people out there that do profit from war. And this kind of drugs everybody else, working class people, into this spiral and into this, let's say, mythical existence of security that is guaranteed by the military power of somebody. In order for all this scheme to work, what is very important is othering. like creating a supposed identity that we share that needs to be protected from everybody else. To illustrate it a little bit better, I took a look at the common NATO-EU report that was just published on the 20th of June, just 5 days ago. And I'm going to read out a couple of sentences, okay? It starts, by introducing the relationship, reading out already third paragraph. Our strategic partnership is more robust and relevant than ever at this critical moment for Euro-Atlantic security. We just heard in the morning that we're talking about the Pacific as well, but perhaps they put it in a couple of years later. Political dialogue at all levels has further intensified, demonstrating NATO and the EU unity and our common resolve in condemning Russia's war of aggression and in expressing full solidarity with Ukraine, its sovereignty and territorial integrity, as well as its right to self-defense. This is how the report starts. And you read it a little bit further down, it addresses some common goals that were set between the two organizations, NATO and the EU, back in 2016. And afterwards, they list a couple of things they want to highlight within this report. So I'm starting quoting again, reading out. NATO and EU political dialogue and common messaging. I want you to be careful now when I'm reading out, okay? Common messaging further developed to include notably the joint visit by NATO Secretary General and the President of the European Commission to Lithuania and Latvia in November 2021. A joint press conference by the Presidents of the European Council and the European Commission and the Secretary General of NATO on the very day of Russia's invasion in Ukraine, as well as increased frequency of cross-participation in respective high-level meetings. So all the high-level people meet each other and they like each other a lot. Going forward. Well-established political consultations continued in different settings, including through regular meetings between the North Atlantic Council and the EU Political and Security Committee. Our dialogue remains an indispensable and highly valued instrument for strengthening mutual understanding, building confidence, and ensuring reciprocal transparency vis-à-vis the members, as well as their ownership and strong support. And this is the last point I will read. Agreed cooperation work stands continue to deliver concrete results, including through the newly established structured staff dialogue of resilience, cooperation on strategic communications, countering foreign information manipulation and interference, efforts to ensure coherence and output between the respective NATO and EU defense planning processes, whereas requirements overlap, and between capability development efforts, continue exchanges through the structured staff dialogue, blah, 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 blah. More or less, this report is all about how good friends the EU and NATO are, how aligned they are, how aligned their political interests are, and how they very much like peace, but they can only promise peace if we accept that we will spend more money in weaponizing each other, in continuing in this paranoid tactics of deterrence instead of actually addressing the social and very real material interests that have put our planet, my generation, and everybody that comes after me in jeopardy. The reality is that if we do not change the way we behave towards nature and each other in the next 10 years, the future will not be livable, worth living. And you see it already now. You see it already now. Things that 20 years ago were unimaginable are happening. The biggest river of Italy is right now empty. People in the north of Italy have to ration their showers. In Germany, we had hurricanes. Over 70% of the species, of other species of fauna and flora are dying, and most of them will die before we even get the chance to get to know them, because it is an illusion that we already know how nature functions. We don't. So now we are in a situation where The war in Ukraine accelerated a process that has been going for a very long time, and this is also where I want your attention. It is a lie that the war kind of forces the EU and NATO in over-militarizing again. The militarization processes of the European Union have been going on for decades. This war waged by Putin, which we all condemn, I haven't met a single person in here that would justify what's going on in the Ukraine, but still, it is a perfect excuse to militarize our countries even more. We are in a situation where Germany is about to have, again, the third biggest army in the world. The European Union will build capacities that will be able to kill people like they do right now at the border, but in a bigger scale, and will do nothing for reparations to all the countries that have been colonized, to all the peoples we have extorted, to the nature we have destroyed. We force people leaving their homes and then we kill them at the borders. Europe right now, if you read, which is also something I welcome you to do when this is finished, Google the European Strategic Compass and take a good look. The main fund that will facilitate, let's say, the further militarization of the Union is called European Peace Facility. The very militarization process that makes this threat of war hanging above our heads is called a security process, something that de facto makes us all more insecure. So it's clear we need to react. 2 minutes, 3 minutes left, 2 minutes left, okay. I need 10 seconds to think what to do with this 1.5 minutes. The codependencies that exist in this world are nothing to be afraid of. It's something we have to see, recognize, and take it for granted in order to build the world better. The solutions that are given to us, the weaponization, militarization, hate, nationalism, are false solutions. And maybe I'll finish with that. Every war that happens, at least in my 40 years, I became 39 a week ago, all the wars that I witnessed were class wars. All the poor people died. The elites of countries where war is waged are going to their private islands with their private jets and their private yachts. We need to start loving each other more. And perhaps I stop with this now, because we will not be safe until everyone is safe.
Thank you very much, Katerina. Now we give the floor to Reiner.
Yeah, dear colleagues and dear friends, what to say after these two introductions describing the world and trying to look for alternative. You know, I will start with one sentence. For me, as one who was really working hard at this report, common security concept is a revolutionary concept because it excludes one element of history was go through thousands of years. It excludes war. And this is a revolutionary act for human beings when we could realize this. So that is for me a key point why I am so much in favor of this report. Excluding wars means the end of nuclear threats, coming to a nuclear weapon-free world. And it was not mentioned. But the doomsday clock was put to 100 seconds before midnight, before the Ukrainian war, and before the last developments in South China Sea and around Taiwan. And even, and you know, here are sitting some people which are in the same age or a little bit younger than me. Cuban Crisis, it was 7 minutes to midnight. And I will never forget how it was at home in the Cuban crisis situation. How was the atmosphere in our family? There was fear, poor fear, day and night. Even as kids, we get it, that it was a very dangerous situation. We are now 100 seconds before midnight. So that shows the urgent need for such a report and for a common security structure. The second point I really would like to mention is that this common security report is not a European report. It is a global report. We said we need common security for the whole world, for the problems of and conflicts in all parts of the world. This is not to develop again, like Palme Commission has done it, a report for Europe. That we need common security for Pennsylvania, for the Pennsylvanian area. We need common security for the South China Sea. We need common security for Central Africa. And this is the huge challenge and the work we are now asking for to do with this report. We develop guidelines in the report. We develop first ideas in this direction. But to concretize these reports for the different areas, this is now the work and the challenge for peace movements, for peace researchers, when they are really peace researchers and not war researchers, looking to the new peace research report in Germany, which is really a war report, and for politicians which are on this way, and for the whole society and the whole communities. That is the challenge of the report when it's now published. And the second, and this is also the difference to the Olaf Palme report, it is by the global and by the regional report, this is also a global report, because it includes the question of climate change, poverty, hunger, and why. All these global challenges can only be started to be solved when we have a world of cooperation and dialogue. Can you imagine that we are coming to a reduction of the emissions when both sides are raising their arms race day and night and night? Pentagon is the 49th big emission spender in the world, higher than Sweden, Denmark, Portugal. And what will be in 10 years? And this beautiful Germany now with the third biggest army in the world, what does this mean for the emissions? And can you imagine that we have cooperation which is needed for solving the global crisis between countries when we are in confrontation and starting wars and fighting against each other? This will not work. So this report and common security means the basic for cooperation and even one step less, trust building. I think we are really in the beginning where we were in the end of the 50s, in the beginning of the 60s. We need trust building against the bloc and the big competition fighters. Trust building means you have to understand the other, and the other has to understand yourself. And you have not to look for, and this is my critics to this European stupid report, you not to look for where you can accuse the others, where you can fight against the others. No, common security means you have to look where you can find common points. Even when we are only small common points, develop these small common points, find agreement to these small common points, solve these small common points, and on the basis of this, you can enlarge more common activities and more common actions. You know, this Cold War period does not start with the Inf Treaty. It started that the West Berlin people was allowed over Christmas to go to East Berlin with a ticket, come back in the night. This was the first negotiation between two sides starting overcoming the Cold War atmosphere in the situation. And when someone like European Union, NATO, it's the job of NATO to be aggressive. But when someone who is calling themselves a peace partner and got the Peace Nobel Prize, they shouldn't give back immediately, start only accusing the others, then it is absolutely the opposite of common security and not in the orientation of peace. And that is the background of these reports says, please look for the common points, trust building, cooperation, dialogue. who can speak with Putin? I think the only president, the only two presidents in Europe who can speak with Putin is now Draghi and Macron. But, we need this discussion because, the overcome of Putin is the work of the Russian people, not of ours. But we have to work with this. We are the chairs of these countries. So that means for me the Common Security Report, trust building, cooperation. And cooperation has for me two key points which were mentioned by Katerina. When we want to solve the border problems in a peaceful and humanitarian way, we need also cooperation at every border. Can you imagine we have cooperation at every border when the countries are fighting against each other? I cannot. And the same with the refugees. When we want to bring the refugees home, we have to overcome and solve the problems which are the background of the refugees. And this means we need peace process. So this is the key point why for me this Common Security Report is so important. And let me say one other point which Katerina mentioned without naming it. This is the question, when you read these papers from the European Union, this is the question of double standards.
Yes.
One of the most horrible points today are the double standards. I have not to tell this group what double standards in peace and war means. You all know this. But common security, dialogue, cooperation means to overcome double standards. Because you have to find a common base for discussion and negotiations. And this you have to share the views. And what should Biden say to Russian leaders? Say, oh, we are doing wars everywhere, but you are not allowed to do wars. Or vice versa. What should Putin say? We are making it better than you. But so double standards is a killing instrument for going to wars, for creating hate, which is the opposite of common security. These are some key points which I think common security is so important. Then comes, because we are on a NATO conference, what does this mean for military alliances? Military alliances, from my point of view, will be not the first steps in the development of common security, but will be a step. Military alliances means always to work exclusive, because you exclude someone whom you named enemy or competition. Common security means inclusive. Every countries of the region are working together. So this means the common security structure for Europe must include Russia and Belarus and all these countries. So this at the end means that we have to overcome also military alliance. Military alliance and common security are at the end not compatible. But not in the beginning, because first steps goes first. But we have to come to overcome these military alliances. This includes also military alliances of other sides. We have also to open Shanghai. Maybe we have Shanghai Cooperation. We have also to open the Russian military alliances and an end. So the end means, and this was in the 90s definitely possible to overcome military alliances. The lights were burning in the NATO headquarters day and night when they were thinking in 1991, what is our new strategy, how we can survive when the cooperation is winning in Europe? And they find solutions. First, they saw we go all around the world for our interventional wars. And second, they never forgot that Russia is an enemy. They never forgot this. So that is the point to military alliances. And then, is this a report for intellectuals, high-level people? No. Is a report for the peace movement, although for the peace movement too. The peace movement has to create the basis that the government and the politicians are coming together again. This is why I'm so in favor of all the discussions which we have in Asia between the peace movement for common activities and common actions, including China, including all these partners. And that means for me, and I'm very helpful to our Finnish colleagues, that we are starting preparing this process to Helsinki 2025. 50 years after Helsinki 1, we have to create from the ground a new movement for common security, which is not exclusive of peace movement activities, but we should push it and put it forwards and have to try to get others into our boat for more common actions, and this is a key point. And at the end, the conference will be in Malta or Vienna. I don't care about this. I'm quite sure that it will not be again in Helsinki. This game...
We will skip
this game is over.
As name.
With the name, with these, but there is a second point which is very important for the peace movement. I think a key point for me for common security means that we need peoples to peoples contact. I call this again, like in the 80s, people's diplomacy. What for a stupid situation that the German scientific community, Max Planck Society, and all these great scientific powers stop all contact to Russia. Einstein would be immediately dying when he knew this. What is needed are the contacts. And we, as peace movement and activists, trade unions, churches, singer clubs, sports clubs, we should develop again so many contacts to Russian people as possible. The US guys have done it in the 80s brilliantly. They were traveling, making walks there. We need this again. Without these peoples-to-peoples contact, which is the opposite of creating hate and fake news, is that peoples are talking with each other, learn each other. See that the Russian family are also nice family and the Russian food is great food. And not to believe what our horrible mass media are telling us. So my final words is, common security will only work with the peace movement. The peace movement has now a leading role to push it, and to develop first steps and first action. Wherever you are, you can be a part of such a common security wave. And that is what we have to develop. Otherwise, and I will not repeat what my two colleagues were saying, we are in a horrible, dangerous situation. But we have, and the report is a short part of it, we had also a chance to overcome it. In every crisis is also a chance to become better. Let us use the chance. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you. I think it's important that you highlighted how this is a global thing. So actually this panel was entitled, "Which security do we want for Europe?" But actually we are talking about which security we want for the world. We cannot think in terms of regions, but in a global way. So now if there are any questions that you would like to ask, please come here. Take the microphone, and if you can stay in front of the camera.
Okay.
Wait, we have to...
Sorry.
It's actually not a question. It's a request. I'm from Finland. I'm ashamed of that, and I'm especially ashamed of coming from Finland as a woman, because we have a woman social democratic prime minister that sent this application for NATO membership. So I'm double ashamed. But Reiner was talking about the OSCE 2025. Women for Peace in Finland have made 2 appeals to the Finnish president and ministers and parliament about having this conference. We have now about 160 organizations, mainly from the Baltic Sea area, but also now in the last round, international organizations. And we would like to repeat that appeal forever and ever and ever. And I have done this very primitive list where I would like you to sign if you want to be informed about the OSCE process, and that we can send you an eventual new appeal text, which then would be distributed further. So I leave it here, somewhere there at the speaker's booth. And please, if you are interested in getting information about it, please sign. So that's the humble request. Thank you.
Come.
The best thing is organizing meetings like this is the pleasure to hear from you such inspiring words, because sometimes one feel alone, no? The finding the rationality, no, the human beings, no. So it's so essential to thank you very much for your speech. My question is about the international law. Because we were talking all the time, and how the few times we talk about what is the United Nations, what is the international law that humankind has created from the Second World War until today, Where is that? And why we don't demand it more? You said, no, ask Macron or ask Draghi to be mediating with Russia. Not a serious thing, but maybe it will be more serious to give again the NATO, the UN, a role they have to have. Because clearly in Europe we are, I don't expect any spectacular movement for any president of any country. The mediator was the president of a club in England, I mean, something ridiculous. The question is why NATO narrative is diminishing the international law, the idea that there is no law in the world. So we have a police, NATO, and we have the attackers, in this time, the criminal aggression from Russia to Ukraine. So this is my first time. What is the NATO? What is the role of the international law? Or do you think it's a moment to rethink the international law and to push for the United Nations General Assembly every year they meet for advanced, be more brave than they have done until today? My second remark, and I finish with this, is that the most terrible thing for me is how philosophy is damaging because of this narrative. Yesterday, the General Secretary of NATO said literally, trusting in peace will draw us to a war. So, excuse me? Excuse me, I mean, what? It's like, there is no reason, scientific idea to say that if you defend peace, you will do war. I mean, it's absurd, it's ridiculous. It's a joke, a bad joke, a terrible joke, a fascist joke. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you all for your contribution. My question was again about where is someone? You said where's international law? Where is the peace movement? I mean, nobody of you said a word about the fact that there is no peace movement. Okay, I'm 33. One part of my politicization, and a strong element of my politicization, was the anti-war movement within the war of Iraq, etc. It was where I realized that, okay, being a pacifist is not enough, you should also be a socialist, like an anti-imperialist, blah, 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 blah. I mean, I was in school, and the children in school, like 13 years old, 14 years old, were telling to their teachers that, you know, we won't have classes today, we want to go to the demonstration. Like without political organizations in the school, like drawing us to do this or that. It was like spontaneous, because it was huge in society. And now nothing. Nothing. I mean, in my country, I come from Greece, which has a very rich tradition of resistance and movements and the left, etc. Since the outbreak of the war, we have organized like one demo, anti-war, the left, which had like 2,000 people, and we said, okay, it was decent. And nada más, nothing.
Hello, Pippa Bartolotti from UNAC. One of the speakers did actually talk about economic development and climate change to be fought in the same breath. And I wanted to remind everybody that economic development, as it currently stands, is not compatible with fighting climate change. I want to remind you that many of the wars are also resource wars. And I want to remind you of what has happened with the extraction economies that are ruining so much of our planet, and there is nothing that can be put back in to make it good. So it is an existential threat, but nobody really sees it that way. They think it's somebody else's existential threat. It's not. It's our existential threat, and we are taking everything else with us. Economic development in its current trend or in its current state is completely incompatible with fighting climate change, and we have to think of a new way of framing that, and we have to act accordingly. Thank you.
Yes, I will go first. I will let that comment stand because I totally agree. I mean, it's clear that we cannot continue like this. I think I also made it clear in my intervention before, but I want to address the two other questions. What about international law, and where is the peace movement? I will start with the second question, with the later. We heard also today that there are now some studies going on in the societies, and most of societies like peace, right? Most of the people want to live in peace. The question is, and this connects to the next question, what is peace? What is peace when we call soldiers, armed soldiers, peace troops? Is this peace? Okay, what do we have to do in order to enable a peace movement? We need to take the topic of peace inside the social movements. In my view, the reality is that the last 20 years, we kind of got lost in our own soups. So you had the anti-racist movement, the feminist movement, the environmental movement, the labor movement, the peace movement. Our job is to bring the peace issue in all social movements, to find a formula in which we can explain to everyday people boldly why the war that is happening somewhere else is very relevant to us. Why should I care if there is bombing in Afghanistan? Why should I care if there is bombing in Ukraine? Why should I care if there's bombing in Mali? We need to find the formula to explain the proximity it has to every single one of us, because every war destroys the planet, every war destroys trust, every war destroys peace. So we need to find this formula, and of course, I do think that addressing more aggressively the beneficiaries of wars and the ones that lose in a war is something we need to learn how to do a little bit better. Who loses, who gains? Who dies, who survives? These questions are class questions. I mean, I'm sorry to repeat that again, but it is like this. And we need to start working with that more, bringing the peace topic everywhere, even if it's very difficult right now. And then this takes me to the second question, international law. It's a very legitimate question. But listen, you have now, I read out of the NATO EU document, and they're criticizing Putin for breaching international law, which is totally true, because he invaded a sovereign country, and he's killing people, and his soldiers are raping women, and people die, and this is a breach of international law. But what about the 27 people that died at the Spanish-Moroccan border yesterday? And were let alone with no medical assistance? What about the 40,000 people that we drowned? What about the 30,000 children that are still missing in the Balkan route and nobody cares for them? What about international law when people don't even get the chance to claim asylum? They're immediately pushed into closed camps away from society, and they're othered. What about international law when European Union countries are taking water from other countries to feed their industry? What about international law in the US when in Flint people are forced to drink poisoned water? Doesn't this apply? So there is this bigotry. We have to be very careful, because every time, in my opinion, one of the power structures of our globe right now, which is the West, one of the ex-colonial powers, which is the West, addresses international law, we have to be super careful. We need to reclaim that law. And now I want to finish with a positive remark, okay? There are some experiences we do have, people's tribunals. Maybe we have to start revisiting these practices. Maybe what we need is claiming the international law for us and have in every city, in every village, people's tribunals that actually get people into discussing peace and the breach of international law, but by those who are taking power. Last sentence, democracy. because democracy keeps being thrown around, you know, like this. Oh, we're democratic, and it's all about the democratic West against the non-democratic others again. How many leaders in African countries and in South American countries did the West kill? How much was democracy in my country, Greece, 2015, respected when people said, fuck you, I'm sorry, but we don't want this austerity anymore? What about democracy now when it comes to the European Union strategic compass and the militarization plans, where they're actually seriously discussing about stopping with a consensus principle, which means that Germany and France alone would decide take the rest of us to war and we would be able to do nothing? What about democracy when risk assessments that are used to write this strategic compass are not presented to the European Parliament? None of our MEPs saw them. What about democracy when such decisions are only made by governments and the oppositions are kept out of it? So we need to put everything in question. It sounds like a lot of work, but I do think that if we do so, we have a chance of winning. We cannot continue as we did until now. We have to change everything.
So, 5 minutes.
5 minutes. That's easy. Okay. So uncharacteristically, let me start with something positive, which is to say that within the United Nations, a number of the non-aligned countries and others have moved to challenge the right of the big powers to veto in the Security Council, and have moved to be able to review those vetoes. It's not everything we need, but it's a positive development. And interestingly, having just come from Mongolia and then being at the meeting of the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, we see that nations which we think of as small, marginal, non-aligned, actually do have agency, and they are also forces in this world that we need to encourage. Then to move to some tougher things. My particular background is that one of my classmates at the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service was a guy named Bill Clinton, and in our course on international relations, we were taught that international law is what those that have the power to impose it say it is. And so, you know, the United Nations was created, right, basically by the victorious powers of the Second World War to maintain their influence and control, and at the Security Council to mediate the differences that they have. This is our inheritance, right? You know, the Chinese are saying we had nothing to do with this, and international law needs to be changed. So I think you know, the Putin has violated, the United States violates it, China violates it. I mean, the South China Sea and the UN decision on you know, the rights of other nations to the islands in the South China Sea. So you know, this is how power works until it faces pressures from below, whether that's popular pressures from us or from the global South. Simply to say, one of the things that we hear in the moment is that the world is moving into blockification. On the one hand, you know, the deepening of NATO. On the other hand, China and Russia. You know, a lot of nations abstained in the vote on the Ukraine war. You know, there is the possibility of the emergence of a new aligned movement. Even a number of those countries, in terms of their domestic policies, we don't love. But we need to look at those dynamics and see how we can leverage them. Maybe just kind of following for half a second here on what Katrina was saying in terms of democracy. You know, Biden is going to Saudi Arabia. This is a war for democracy. You know, the contradictions are very real, and it's really about power. Finally, a reflection on where is the peace movement. I don't have a comprehensive answer on it, but I can say one of the factors in the United States has been economic pressure on students. In the United States, getting a college education is extremely expensive. Students have to take out massive loans. They have to think about getting jobs that are going to allow them to pay off those loans that'll maybe put them in with their education in a position to have a middle-class job. So under those kinds of pressures, people are less likely to think about what's happening in the wider world, are less likely to take to the streets. And it means, in part, that our movement has to be multi-issue, right? We can't just be independent of thinking about economic pressures on society. One positive model we have in the United States, not the only one, is the Poor People's Campaign, which grows out of the African-American struggle for justice. It grows out of Martin Luther King's initial Poor People's Campaign, which was focused against poverty, against racism, and against militarism. And now they've added also climate change. They held a major demonstration in Washington this past weekend, and it provides a model. I mean, we have to build intersectional movements if we're going to, and not to think in terms of a kind of primacy of peace movement. We have to think about a unified, integrated movement if we're going to move forward. And also, I would say to be talking about common security at its multiple levels, including in terms of economic justice and social justice within our societies as well.
You know, I will concentrate in my discussion only one sense to international law. What is international law historically? It is the general power structures written in laws. And power structures changed, and power structures influence how you work with laws in a positive and negative sense. So every law is also a day-to-day fight, how it is interpreted and how it is realized. This happens on the national level. Look to the decision of the High Court in the United States, and I can add this to other countries, and look to the local and national level. So international law is nothing fixed. It is also a point which is in the general political fights and discussions. And we have to influence these discussions, these fights, and in the longer term consequences, it will also influence international law, because this is nothing else than in written form, power structures, relations, in an actual situation, which historically and actually changed. And this, when we have this deeper understanding of international law, we avoid too much problems with the actual developments. You know, we love also the General Secretary of the United Nations. He makes great speeches, but he cannot more change than the power structures are. And when there are these veto powers, he's alone, like the Pope. You know, yeah. So that is the reality of the world, and we can only change the reality when we change the social structures of the society. If we call this class fight, or if we call this social ecological transformation, we can discuss it. But that is the reality. So that's this. But you know, coming from an organization which had their 131 years anniversary last year, and are really the biggest peace organization in the world, I can only say peace movements have historically and actually always an up and down. Peace actions are waves. And you can never create at a green table a peace movement. There must be factors of actions, activity, political situation, psychological factors, individual factors, fear factors, coming together that a peace movement can develop. We, as peace activists, can only help and move this and support the ideas, be creative to help to develop it. That is our role, and everyone can do a little bit for that. And that is, I think, is the key point. And now, I think we really should see that we are doing this in a very dangerous situation by the political behavior, but also by the social, ecological consequences of this military race politics. You know, how people should survive over the autumn, with the energy prices, with the gasoline prices, with the house prices as consequence of the energy prices, with the inflation, with going to the supermarkets. But these can create two activities. It can create vote for right wing, and we should not underestimate that. Yeah? Following the propaganda and the hate speeches of the right wing, this can mean staying at home, doing nothing, lying in bed and taking the carpet over you, or being active. And what is our role is to estimate activities wherever we can, in the peace movement, in the trade unions, in all the social factors where we are active and where we can help to develop movement. This is our role, also maybe also our historical duties to do. And no one is too small, no one is too petty, no one is too young or too old for doing a little bit for that. And then hopefully it can develop this river, which brings again bigger movements on the streets. We had this in the past. I always say, you know, can you remember how Rosa Luxemburg or Karl Liebknecht must feel themselves in August 1914, where from 480 parliamentarians, 479 vote for war. How can you feel in such a situation? But 3 years later, they were the leaders of mass demonstration and mass protest. And they could be the leaders because they were continually staying against war. They were not opportunistic, running behind others, saying, okay, we must be a little bit more cautious and maybe have half a war. This is the accuse to my political left at home. Yeah, so that is, please be strong, try what you can do. I know that this is not easy. All of us feel terribly bad in this situation. And sometimes, you know, you want to stay home and say, oh God, let it be. But, you know, so long you can, please try to do your small part for developing the movement. And then I am personally optimistic, and looking to the IPB and peace movement history, that the river will again come together to a bigger social movement, what we need to save the world.
Well, thank you very much for this last message of hope. There's a lot of work to do, and together we can make it happen. We are running late already, so we should leave the room, and as soon as possible. Please return the headphones.
No, go to the big room.
To the big room, yes. Go to the big room and return the headphones in the main room, please. Thank you very much.